that the gospel is good news for every life and all of life, and that it speaks directly to any beliefs and ethics that do not line up with God's kingdom isn't new, is it? I mean, Christians have known this for years, right? It's why Christians have strong opinions about what pro-life is and the sanctity of marriage and what it means. Preachers have been preaching that in pulpits for years. We must be pro-life and support the sanctity of marriage. And Christians would hear that, and because they would agree, they would say, yes, preacher, preach! And the gospel has to transform our beliefs and our ethics, even if it includes our party politics. Christians have always known this for years, right? It's why Christians have strong opinions about orphan care and bringing an end to sex trafficking. Preachers have been preaching that in pulpits in recent years. We must take care of orphans, domestic and abroad. We must bring an end to sex trafficking. And Christians would hear that because they would agree and they would say, yes, preacher, preach. The gospel has to transform our beliefs and ethics, even if it includes our party politics. But have Christians really known that for years? That the gospel addresses every life and all of life and speaks directly to every belief and ethic that does not line up with the kingdom? When we speak of things like racial injustice or indiscriminate compassion for neighbors and poverty or welcoming immigrants or overzealous patriotism that turns into nationalism, why all of a sudden is this not part of the gospel? Like, why all of a sudden is speaking to these matters because of the gospel party political? Because it is political, just not in the way we often assume. See, the gospel is political because it announces a king of a kingdom. And you don't stand before the court of law and get arrested for something that isn't. It was a part of Paul's gospel. It was a part of Peter's gospel. It was a part of James's gospel, John's gospel, and it was a part of their gospel because it was a part of Jesus's gospel, which he understood from his Bible, what we call the Hebrew Scriptures, which spoke to these matters time and again, ensuring justice for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant on social and legal levels. Yeah, social and legal justice. Social justice, tzedakah, mishpat, legal justice, mentioned over 2,000 times. Israel and Judah fell prey to their own versions of nationalism and exceptionalism many times. The prophets have to come and speak to them about that. The Jewish Christians tended to think of their ethnicity as superior to the Gentiles, and the Gentile Christians tended to think the same when compared to Jewish Christians. They were rebuked time and again. Racism, nationalism, caring for the poor, widow, orphan, and immigrant. It's not just an American political issue, even when it names races, countries, and specific descriptions of people. It's a gospel issue. It's a kingdom political issue because the gospel speaks directly to beliefs and ethics that do not line up with the kingdom of God, and it'll do so concretely and specifically. That's been an explicit part of my teaching of the gospel for almost 15 of my 20 years of vocational ministry. And it wasn't a part of my first 5 years of vocational ministry. I wasn't taught that gospel, that robust a gospel. It just wasn't a part of my church tradition. But I have come to believe the gospel is good news for every life, all life. And it's a gospel that speaks directly to the beliefs and ethics that do not line up with God's kingdom. But here's the thing. See, not only did Paul's gospel get him arrested, it got him executed when he was beheaded by the Roman government around 64 CE. Not only did Dietrich Bonhoeffer's gospel get him arrested, it got him executed in a Nazi training camp with a death by hanging April 9, 1945. And not only did Dr. Martin Luther King's gospel get him arrested, it got him assassinated April 4, 1968. The gospel is good news to a world in desperate need of love, peace, justice, and hope. It is good news to a tired people living under the oppressive power of all forms and manifestations of the reign of sin and death, whether it be power-mongering leaders or unjust laws. But the gospel is bad news to anyone who opposes love in the form of equality and equity, who oppose peace in the form of humility and forgiveness, and who oppose justice in the form of truth-telling and hospitality. What will you choose, brother and sister? A gospel worth dying for must be a gospel worth living for. It's probably why Paul said in Romans 1, verse 16, I refuse to be ashamed of sharing the gospel of God's liberating power unleashed in us through Christ. For I am thrilled to preach that anyone who believes is saved. The Jew first, and the people everywhere. Either the gospel is good news or it's not. It addresses all of life or none of life. If the gospel is good news, then it must include justice where there is injustice, mercy where there is no mercy, and faithfulness where there is fickleness. The unjust, merciless, and fickle wreak havoc on society. They marginalize people, misappropriate power, and misuse relationships. But the just, merciful, and faithful bear witness to the reign of King Jesus. They participate in his work of making human flourishing possible for all who want it. They welcome the marginalized and embrace self-giving love as a fundamental expression of power and work toward reconciliation in all relationships. I am weary of hearing my brothers and sisters, not only in this church, but in the world over, acting like the gospel doesn't address all our beliefs and ethics. It is good news for every life and all of life, to liberate us from misguided allegiances and misappropriated hopes. Jesus is King of a kingdom to which we have been invited to live and learn how to flourish, but we have to submit our beliefs and ethics to the King, and it'll get in the way of the things we value. And then we'll be brought to the place of decision. Do we value those things? Do we value the King? See, Bonhoeffer chose the King, and it cost him his life. Dr. Martin Luther King chose kingdom. It cost him his life. Paul chose the kingdom, and it cost him his life. The gospel is the good news of liberation made possible by King Jesus for every life and all of life. And if embraced, results in beliefs and ethics that promote liberation and life for all.